You need a home, and I need a mommy," said the little girl to the Omega, until the Alpha King heard. She pressed her small hands against the rough bark of a tree, hiding from the hunters that patrolled the edge of the cursed woods. No one knew why she had survived alone for so long, or why the strange magic in her blood seemed to whisper in the shadows, but she had learned quickly. To survive, you had to move silently and trust no one. Her tiny boots crunched on the fallen leaves as she darted between the thick trunks. Even in the darkness, she could see shapes moving in the moonlight, eyes glinting with hunger or suspicion. The forest was dangerous, yes, but it was safer than the village she had fled weeks ago, where whispered rumors called her a witchling, and the neighbors had begun leaving traps along the road. As she ran, a warm, strange feeling began to rise in her chest. A pull like someone was calling her, not with words but with a presence, quiet and lonely. She didn't know why, but she followed it, her curiosity overcoming fear. At the heart of the forest stood a crumbling tower, half hidden by ivy and shadow. Its stones were dark, soaked with years of rain and neglect. A single window, high and broken, seemed to watch her as if the tower itself were alive. Leora stepped closer, her heart thumping. She had heard the stories. The Omega exile was said to live here, a man cast out from the villages and the king's court alike. Dangerous, lonely, rumored to be unkind. But when she peered through the broken window, what she saw made her pause. A man, tall and broad, with hair as dark as the night and eyes that seemed to carry storms, sat by a low fire. His clothes were tattered, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world pressed on him. He was sharpening a blade with slow, precise movements, and yet the sorrow in his posture made Leora's chest ache. She stepped forward, brushing leaves from her coat. "Hello," she called softly. Her voice trembled slightly. The man froze, eyes snapping to the small figure at the edge of the clearing. For a moment he simply stared, as if trying to decide whether she was a ghost, a threat, or something else entirely. "I'm not going to hurt you," Leora added quickly, taking another step closer. I just wanted to see if," she hesitated, "if someone here needed a home." The man's eyes narrowed. He did not speak at first. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a voice low and rough from disuse, he said, "A home? You've come to the wrong place, little one. I have nothing to give." Leora's small chin lifted. She had expected him to be scary, maybe even cruel, but there was a sadness behind his words that made her want to reach out anyway. I need a mommy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And maybe you need a home too." The man's hand stilled on the blade, his knuckles whitening. He looked at her like she had said something impossible, something that made the air around them shift. "You, what?" "I said," Leora repeated, her eyes wide and honest, "you need a home and I need a mommy." The words hung in the night, fragile yet unshakable. For the first time in many years, the man's gaze softened. He turned his eyes away from the fire and looked at her fully. There was fear there, yes, but also something else, something he had thought long dead, a spark of hope. "I'm not a mother," he said finally, his voice low, almost unsure. "I don't care," Leora said simply. "You can be mine, and maybe I can help you too." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of wet stone and pine needles. Kale, this was the exile's name, though she didn't know it yet, looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and something deeper he refused to name. He had been alone for so long, hiding from the world that had rejected him, that the idea of this tiny, fearless child offering warmth and trust seemed almost unreal. He lowered the blade slowly, his rough hands trembling slightly. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, more to himself than to her. "This place, it's dangerous for you, for anyone." "I'm not scared," Leora said. She tilted her head, her hair falling across her face in messy waves. "I can stay out of trouble, I promise." Kale studied her. She was small, fragile even, yet there was a strength in her eyes, a courage he had not seen in anyone for decades. And despite the walls he had built around his heart, Something inside him stirred, something tender, something dangerously close to hope. "Why me?" he asked finally, his voice almost a growl. "Why here?" "Because you look lonely," she said simply, "and lonely people need a home too." The word struck him harder than he expected. Loneliness. Yes, he knew it well. The cold nights when only shadows kept him company, the silence that pressed on his chest like a stone. And now a child had seen it, not with fear, not with mockery, but with understanding. Cale looked down at her, and for the first time in years he smiled, small, careful, but real. Perhaps I can try," he murmured. Leora's face lit up and she stepped closer, offering him a hand. "Then I'll stay," she said, "and we'll be a family." Cale stared at the tiny hand in his, and for a moment the weight of his exile, his past, the fear and sorrow, all of it seemed lighter. He had been alone for so long, but maybe, just maybe, this little girl could change that. As they sat by the fire, sharing the warmth, the night around them seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere beyond the trees, a shadow moved, silent, observing. The Alpha King, Roan, had been riding through the forest on a patrol of his borders when he had heard the girl's voice. The word mommy had struck him like a blade to the chest, stirring a memory he had long buried. He had stopped his horse without a sound, listening. A small child, fearless, speaking to a man who was an exile. The simplicity of the words, the honesty, it unsettled him. His life had been built on power, control, and fear, and yet the moment he heard that voice, something inside him trembled. He did not move closer immediately. There was curiosity there, yes, but also caution. This child, this exile, he could not know their meaning yet. But he would not forget. And when the time came, he would see for himself what had shaken the foundation of his carefully controlled world. Back at the tower, Cale and Leora were settling in for the night. Cale had given her a blanket and she had curled up near the fire, eyes wide and full of wonder. She looked like a small flame in the darkness, bright and alive. "You really think I could be a mommy?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper against the crackling fire. Cale's lips curved into a half-smile. "I don't know," he admitted, "but perhaps we can find out together." She nodded solemnly, as if accepting a great responsibility. "I'll help you, you'll see. You'll never be lonely again." For the first time in many years, Cale allowed himself to believe her. He could feel a weight lift from his chest, a light in the darkness he had not known was possible. The forest outside was still dark, still full of dangers and whispers, but inside the crumbling tower something new was beginning, a fragile, impossible sort of hope. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the trees, Roan, the Alpha King, watched silently, curiosity burning in his chest. The exile and the girl did not yet know it, but their lives had just begun to intertwine with forces far greater than either of them could imagine. The night stretched on, the wind sighing through the forest like a lullaby. But beneath that calm, the currents of fate were moving, unstoppable and relentless. And when the morning came, nothing would be the same. Leora stirred in her sleep, murmuring something Cale could barely hear. "Home," Cale looked at her, his heart tightening. For the first time he felt a pull he had thought lost forever. Not just for himself, but for the small, fearless girl who had walked into his life and dared to believe in him. Outside the tower, hidden in the shadows of the trees, the Alpha King's eyes burned with recognition, and something far more dangerous, longing. He had heard her words, and they had reached him in a way no command, no crown, no battle ever could. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, and filled with a darkness that stretched beyond the forest and into the heart of the kingdom. Yet even as the winds of fate stirred and the forest whispered secrets of power and exile, one truth remained undeniable. A small, brave girl had changed everything. And Cale, the Omega exile, would never be the same. The forest was quieter now, the wind carrying only the soft rustle of leaves. The night had passed, and dawn broke with pale light spilling through the trees. Leora woke in the crumbling tower with a stretch and a soft yawn, rubbing her eyes. Her little blanket was still wrapped tightly around her, and the fire from last night had died into glowing embers. Kale sat nearby, sharpening his blade again. But this morning there was a difference in him. His movements were less tense, less hollow. He glanced at her with a faint, uncertain smile. "Morning," he said gruffly, though there was warmth in his tone. "Morning," Leora replied cheerfully, though she noticed the shadow behind his eyes, the lingering weight of his exile. "Did you sleep?" Kale looked away, as though answering her would be dangerous. "I've slept little in my life," he murmured. "Sleep doesn't come easy." She tilted her head. "Then maybe today I can make it easier." She smiled at him, a small gesture full of hope. "I'll help you feel at home." He snorted softly but said nothing. Words were often useless for Kale. Actions mattered more. He watched her gather small twigs to rebuild the fire, her fingers nimble, her movements confident. Even in the simplicity of breakfast over flames, she brought light to the tower that had been dark for years. Suddenly, a sound from outside the tower made them both freeze. Footsteps slow, deliberate, and heavy. Kale's hand went to his blade instinctively, but Leora grabbed it gently. "Wait," she whispered. "Don't hurt whoever it is yet." The door creaked open. A tall figure appeared in the doorway. The light caught on his silver-trimmed cloak and the golden insignia of a crown. Kale's eyes narrowed immediately. He knew the markings of the Alpha King. Roan, the Alpha King himself, stepped into the tower, his gaze fixed firmly on the child. His presence was commanding, powerful, and yet he hesitated. Something in Leora's small face had pulled at him, a feeling he could not explain. "Who is this child?" Roan asked, his voice deep, carrying authority and curiosity in equal measure. "This child," Kale said sharply, stepping in front of Leora, "is under my protection. Leave now or you'll regret it." Roan's lips curved slightly. "I am the king," he said, voice low, calm, yet unyielding. "No one in this forest hides from me." Kale's hand tightened around his blade. "I am no subject of any king," he replied, "and you are not welcome here." Leora tugged gently on Kale's sleeve. "Kale, maybe he isn't here to hurt us." Kale's eyes softened slightly at her words. She had a way of cutting through his fear and pride with the simplest statements. But he did not lower his guard. Not yet. Roan's eyes met Leora's. In them she saw something strange, not anger, not cruelty, but something older. Loss, loneliness, longing. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "Child, are you safe here?" he asked gently. "Yes," Leora said firmly. "I'm safe with him." She pointed at Kale. He's my home." The Alpha King's gaze lingered on Kale, a storm of emotions hidden beneath his calm exterior. Kale was strong, yes, but he carried wounds, grief, and solitude in his every movement. Roan understood isolation. He knew its weight intimately. And yet this child, this fearless, bright little girl, had brought him to a stop. "You live here alone?" Roan asked carefully, his attention never leaving Leora. "Yes," Kale said quickly. "I survive, that's all that matters." Leora frowned. "Kale, don't be mean," she whispered, but the truth was clear. Kale had spent years hiding, fearing trust, fearing attachment. And now, here was a man whose presence alone could unbalance them, and Kale felt every instinct screaming to fight, flee, and protect all at once. Roan took a slow step closer, studying Kale. He was dangerous, yes, but not reckless. He was lonely, yes, but not weak. The words of the child had already reached him, the ones he had overheard in the forest days ago. "Mommy," she had said. "And you need a home." The simplicity of the phrase struck him harder than any declaration or battle he had faced. "You hear her words," Kale said finally, his voice low and tense. "I don't know what they mean to you, but I won't let her." "She is safe," Roan interrupted softly. There was authority, yes, but also an undeniable calm. "I would never harm a child." Leora stepped forward, placing her small hand gently on Roan's arm. "You don't have to fight. He isn't mean. He just needs someone to care." The Alpha King looked down at her, caught off guard. Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. She saw him not as a king, not as a ruler of armies, but as a man capable of feeling. Kale's jaw tightened. He hated the effect she had on others. On him, yes, but also on this king who suddenly seemed to intrude on their fragile peace. I said, "Enough," Leora interrupted, with a tone that startled both men. "Please just listen." Kale froze, his usual control shaken by her insistence. Leora took a deep breath. "We can all be safe. If we try, I don't want to fight, I just want a home, don't you?" For a moment, silence filled the tower. The only sound was the crackling of the small fire. Then Roan's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we can try. But you must understand, little one, the world outside is dangerous." "I understand," Leora replied with determination. "I've survived it already." Kale watched her, heart tightening with pride and fear all at once. She was fearless in ways he could never be. And yet she had no idea how dangerous the king's attention might become. "You have no idea who I am," Roan said slowly. "And yet you speak to me as if you know my heart." "How?" Leora shrugged. "I just feel it, the same way I feel Kale's heart. You're lonely. And I know what it's like to be alone. You don't have to be anymore." The Alpha King's hand brushed against his cloak unconsciously, the weight of his crown suddenly heavier. Her words stirred something he had buried long ago, something he thought he had forgotten. She saw him. Really saw him. And that was dangerous. Kale's eyes darkened. He sensed the tension, the pull between the king and the child, and it filled him with a mix of fear and jealousy. He wanted to protect her, yes, but he also wanted to protect himself from the feelings he could not name. The air between the three of them crackled with unspoken emotions, fragile and sharp. Leora, sensing the unease, smiled softly. "We don't have to be enemies. Not yet. Can't we just be here, together?" Kale's defenses slowly lowered. "I suppose," he muttered reluctantly. "For now." Roan nodded, his eyes never leaving Leora's. "For now," he echoed. But beneath his calm there was a storm of curiosity and something deeper. He did not know where this path would lead, but he knew it would change him forever. Days passed, and the strange rhythm of life in the tower began. Leora helped Kale with chores, cleaned the small living space, and laughed at small jokes only he could make. She told stories of imagined kingdoms, of dragons and heroes, and slowly Kale allowed himself to imagine a life beyond exile. Roan visited often, observing silently, offering guidance and protection when the forest threatened, but never overstepping. Leora grew fond of him, sensing the kindness beneath his power, and even Kale could not deny the effect the king had on her. Yet the balance was fragile. Every day, Kale struggled with his instincts to protect and to isolate. Every day, Roan wrestled with a fascination he could not name. And every day, Leora shone like a small, fearless sun, bridging the gap between two wounded men who had long forgotten how to trust. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in red and gold, a distant howl echoed through the forest. Leora's eyes widened. Kale's hand went to his blade, and Roan's expression tightened. "The forest, it is restless," Kale murmured, sensing danger. "Something is coming." Leora clutched Kale's arm. "Then we stay together," she said firmly. "We can face it, all of us." Roan looked at her, at Kale, and at the tower that had become their fragile refuge. A storm was indeed coming, he realized. A storm that would test their courage, their hearts, and their bonds. And yet, as the last light of day faded, he could not bring himself to leave. For the first time in years, he felt a pull he could not resist, a pull toward something fragile, dangerous, and beautiful. The night closed around them, and the forest whispered secrets in the dark. Somewhere, deep in the shadows, forces stirred. Forces that would not rest until they had claimed what was theirs. But for now, inside the small tower, Kale, Leora, and the Alpha King shared a moment of quiet, a fragile, shining moment that none of them would forget. And deep in his heart, Roan knew, the child's words had changed everything. "You need a home and I need a mommy." The echoes of that phrase would haunt him, guide him, and challenge him in ways he could not yet imagine. And when the time came, choices would have to be made. Hearts would be tested, loyalties would clash, but for now they survived. Together, the forest had grown restless. Even before sunrise, the wind seemed heavier, carrying a cold whisper that twisted through the trees. Leora awoke to the soft hum of the tower creaking under the weight of the night. Something was different today, a subtle tension in the air, a quiet unease that made her small heart beat faster. Kale was already awake, standing by the window, staring into the dark woods. His usual calm was replaced with a sharp vigilance. Leora noticed it immediately. "Kale, what is it?" she asked softly, touching his arm. He turned his eyes to her, dark and stormy. "The forest, it speaks," he said. "I can feel it. Something is coming, and it is not ordinary." Leora shivered. "Something bad," Kale hesitated. "Perhaps something powerful, something old." Her curiosity, however, outweighed her fear. "Can we stop it?" she asked, her small hand tightening around his. "Together." Kale looked at her, and for the first time he saw not just bravery but an undeniable spark of destiny in her eyes. "Together," he murmured, the word carrying more promise than he intended. The first visitor of the morning was not Roan but a messenger from the capital, a tall, solemn man who delivered news that chilled Kale's heart. The message spoke of unrest among the kingdoms, whispers of ancient powers reawakening, and the growing unease that had settled like a shadow over the land. Kale read the parchment carefully, every word reinforcing his fears. "This is not coincidence," he said quietly, folding the paper. "It begins now." Leora, standing close, tilted her head. "What begins?" "An old curse," Kale replied. "One tied to my bloodline and now to yours as well, little one." Leora's eyes widened. "Mine?" Kale nodded. "Yes. Your presence here, it awakens what has lain dormant for centuries, something that should have remained hidden." Before she could ask more, the tower door opened with a commanding push. Roan entered, his eyes scanning the room, sharp as steel, yet shadowed with concern. "I heard," he said. "I know what is stirring." Kale turned to face him, his jaw tight. "And you think your power can protect her?" Roan's gaze softened, yet his voice held authority. "I do not know yet, but I will not allow harm to come to her." The tension between them was palpable. Two men, both strong, both protective, stood together yet apart. And Leora, small and brave, stood between them, unaware of the storm she had already ignited. "I'll help," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid." "You won't face this alone." Kale's eyes softened, a mixture of pride and fear. "You do not understand, child. This is beyond anyone's strength." "Then we will be stronger together," Leora insisted. The day passed with uneasy vigilance. Kale and Roan moved in tandem, scouting the edges of the forest, setting wards to contain the strange magic that had begun to stir. Leora followed, her small hands clutching herbs, charms, and other trinkets she had collected in the forest. Every so often she would reach out and touch Kale's arm, or look at Roan with a question in her wide eyes. By nightfall, exhaustion had settled over the trio, yet they remained alert. The fire in the tower crackled as they sat close, the warmth contrasting the cold tension outside. Kale broke the silence first. "You should not be here," he murmured, almost to himself. "This is dangerous. You do not know the full extent." "I do now," Leora said softly. "But I am not afraid." Roan looked at her, concern etched on his face. "You are too brave," he said gently. "There is danger more than you realize." "I know," Leora replied, meeting his eyes. "But Kale and you protect me, and I want to help protect you too." Kale felt a tug at his chest, a mix of pride and fear he could not name. He wanted to shield her from the world, yet he also wanted her to see the truth, the harshness of life that had shaped him. "You do not understand what it is to live with exile," he said, voice low. "To carry the weight of those who reject you, the ghosts of your past, and now this curse." Leora shook her head. "I don't need to understand everything. I just need to know that we try, together." The Alpha King watched this exchange silently, his jaw tight, emotions brewing beneath the surface. He understood Kale's hesitation, his need to protect, but he also recognized the spark that Leora had ignited in both their hearts, a spark that could not be ignored. Night deepened, and the tower walls seemed to hum with the awakening magic. Leora's eyes glowed faintly as she slept, the power within her responding to the growing tension in the forest. Kale's hand hovered over hers unconsciously, a protective instinct stronger than any fear of the unknown. Roan, standing at the window, observed the forest with sharp eyes, sensing danger but also something more, a connection he could not yet name. In the early hours before dawn, the forest's whispers became cries. Shadows moved among the trees, taking forms that should not exist. Kale drew his blade instinctively, and Roan's presence radiated authority and power, both of them ready to confront whatever had been awakened. Leora stirred, sensing the fear and the power in the air. She stood, small but unwavering, placing herself between the two men. "Wait," she said firmly. "We do this together, not against each other." Kale's eyes softened at her words. "You are fearless," he muttered, almost in awe. Roan's gaze lingered on her, something shifting in his chest. "You are the bridge," he said quietly, "between us, and perhaps between forces far older than we know." The first shadow stepped into the clearing, dark and shifting, like smoke with eyes. Kale's blade was ready, but he did not strike. He waited, trusting Leora's intuition, trusting the bond they had formed. Leora stepped forward, small but radiant, and spoke a word she did not know she could say. The shadow halted. Something in it recognized her presence. She had power, yes, but her heart, her courage, her belief in Kale and Roan amplified it beyond comprehension. The night stretched, filled with whispers and unspoken fears. Kale and Roan worked together seamlessly, moving like one, yet the emotional tension between them simmered beneath the surface. Both men were drawn to the child in different ways, Kale with protection, Roan with fascination and longing. Hours passed, the shadows retreated, but the warning lingered. The forest had stirred, the magic had awoken, and the curse was not yet quelled. Leora's small hand rested in Kale's, while the Alpha King's eyes never left the tree line. All three knew that the coming days would test them, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. In the quiet aftermath, Kale allowed himself to speak words he had not spoken in years. I cannot fail her," he said, voice low and almost broken. "I cannot fail either of you." Roan stepped closer, his tone softer than usual. "Then we do not fail together." Leora smiled faintly, exhausted but resolute. "Together," she echoed. And yet beneath the warmth of their fragile alliance, the curse stirred deeper. Something unseen watched them from the shadows, ancient and patient. Its hunger was slow, deliberate, waiting for the moment when fear, doubt, or betrayal would crack the bonds of trust they had built. Kale knelt by the fire, staring at Leora as she slept. His heart was heavy, full of longing and fear. "You are too brave for this world, little one," he whispered. "But I cannot stop you. I can only protect you." Roan, standing silently by the window, looked out into the forest. The first rays of dawn touched the trees, but even the sunlight could not chase away the darkness. He clenched his fists, realizing the enormity of what was coming. The kingdom, the curse, the child, all of it would demand sacrifices he could not yet measure. The morning came quietly, but the storm had only begun. Leora awoke with the first light, rubbing her eyes. She looked at Kale and Roan, and something in her heart tightened. "I feel it," she said softly. "The curse, it's stronger now." Kale nodded grimly. "It is, and it will grow unless we face it fully." Roan's expression hardened. "Then we face it," he said, "together." The three of them stood, small and fragile in the face of forces far greater than themselves, yet united in courage, hope, and the bonds they had formed. The forest outside whispered secrets, warning, and challenge. But inside the tower, for the first time, they felt strength. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, the unseen watcher stirred, patient and relentless, waiting for the moment when fear and doubt might undo the fragile alliance that had begun. Leora's words echoed softly in Kale's and Roan's minds, binding them in a fragile promise. You need a home and I need a mommy. The echoes were a call, a challenge, and a prophecy, and the world would never be the same again. The sky above the forest was dark, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the trees. The wind howled like a living thing, tugging at the branches, rattling the tower and carrying with it a warning. Leora stood at the window, her small hands pressed against the cool glass. She could feel the stirrings of the curse in the air, a deep, ancient power that sought to bend the forest and the kingdom to its will. Kale stood behind her, his broad shoulders tense, eyes scanning the horizon. Every instinct in him screamed danger. He had faced many enemies before, but the curse was unlike any he had encountered. It was not a person, not a soldier, not a king. It was older than any of them, older than the forest itself. We can't let it reach the village, Kale said, voice low but urgent. If it does, it will destroy everything. Leora turned to him, her expression determined. We won't let it. We can fight it together. Before Kale could respond, Roan appeared at the doorway, his presence commanding. His armor, though practical, shimmered faintly with enchantments, protective wards meant to safeguard them from the forest's magic. He studied both Kale and Leora with a solemn expression. Are you ready? He asked. Kale nodded. As ready as we can be. Leora took a deep breath. Then let's do it. The three of them stepped outside into the gray light of morning. The forest seemed alive, twisting and writhing with shadows that were no longer just shapes but forms with intent. Dark tendrils of mist slithered along the ground, moving like snakes, whispering in a language older than human memory. Kale drew his blade, the steel catching the dim light. Roan's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, but the real strength came from the authority radiating from him, a presence that bent the world around him. Leora closed her eyes briefly and placed her hands on her chest. She could feel the magic inside her responding to the curse, a fragile power that could tip the balance. Stay close, Kale warned, his voice low. Do not let it separate us. The shadows surged suddenly, twisting into monstrous shapes. They were not alive in the normal sense, yet they moved with purpose. Leora's eyes glowed faintly as she whispered words she did not fully understand. The shadows paused, hesitating as though recognizing her presence. You have power, Roan said, his voice both awe-filled and steady. Use it. Do not fear it. Leora nodded, focusing her energy. A gentle light radiated from her hands, warm and steady, pushing back the darkness like sunlight piercing through a storm. The shadows hissed and recoiled, retreating into the deeper forest. Kale moved forward, guiding her while cutting through the dark tendrils that still slithered toward them. Roan followed, his sword flashing with a strange energy that seemed to pierce not only the shadows but the very air around them. Together, they formed a perfect balance, Kale's skill, Roan's strength, and Leora's magic. Hours passed like minutes. The forest seemed endless, each clearing revealing new dangers, each shadow more cunning than the last. Yet with every step, Kale felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond survival. Roan, too, felt it, a bond forming, not just with the child but with the Omega he had once observed with suspicion. And Leora, fearless and radiant, drew strength from them both, her heart shining even in the darkest moments. Finally, they reached the heart of the forest, where the air was thick and heavy, pulsating with the curse's presence. The shadows gathered here, forming a massive shape, a creature of shifting darkness and silent menace. Its eyes were deep pools of ancient hunger, fixed on the three intruders who dared enter its domain. Kale gritted his teeth. This is it, he muttered. Stay together. Roan stepped forward, raising his sword. We end this, he said, together. Leora's small hands glowed brightly, the light intertwining with Roan's sword and Kale's movements, forming a shield of hope and determination. The darkness surged toward them, massive and overwhelming, yet they held their ground. "You are stronger than you know," Leora whispered almost to herself. "And we are stronger together." The shadow creature lunged, and Kale met it with a swift strike, his blade slicing through tendrils of darkness. Roan followed, every movement precise, every strike filled with power and authority. Leora's magic radiated in waves, pushing the darkness back, weakening it, forcing it to retreat. For a moment it seemed as if they might falter. The curse was relentless, shifting and changing, adapting to their attacks. Kale felt exhaustion creeping in, his muscles burning, his mind screaming for retreat. Roan's jaw was tight, sweat and dirt streaking his face, yet his determination never wavered. Leora's small hands trembled, but her light never dimmed. Then something shifted. Kale realized it first. The creature was responding not just to force, but to unity. The bond between them, fragile though it was, formed a stronger power than any curse could anticipate. "Together," Kale said, voice strong. Roan nodded. Leora's glow intensified, brighter and warmer than before. With one final surge they combined their strength. Kale's sword struck true, Roan's power reinforced it, and Leora's magic enveloped the creature, dissolving the darkness into mist that vanished into the morning light. Silence fell. The forest seemed to exhale, releasing its tension. The curse had been pushed back, weakened, if not entirely gone. Kale sank to his knees, breathing heavily. Leora ran to him, hugging his waist, her small hands gripping him tightly. "We did it!" she exclaimed, her voice full of joy. Roan knelt beside them, his eyes softening as he looked at both of them. "Yes," he said quietly, "together we can face anything." Kale looked at him, gratitude and respect mixing with something deeper, unspoken. For the first time in years he did not feel alone. And Leora, she had given him more than life or survival, she had given him hope. Leora climbed onto Kale's lap, her small hands resting on his shoulders. "You both protected me, and I think we protected each other too," she said softly. Roan's gaze softened, almost reluctant to break the moment. "You were right," he admitted. "Unity is strength, not just in battle but in life." The three of them stayed like that for a long moment, watching the sunlight break through the clouds, illuminating the forest. Birds began to sing, and the shadows seemed smaller, less threatening, as if the forest itself was acknowledging their victory. Kale finally spoke, voice low and steady. "This is not the end. The curse, it will not be gone forever. But we have shown it something it cannot take away: hope, courage, and trust." Leora smiled, leaning against him. "Then we just keep trying, together." Roan's eyes lingered on the child, then Kale, then the forest around them. "Together," he repeated, and for the first time in years he felt the weight of his crown lighten. Not because the danger was gone, but because he realized he was no longer alone. Days passed, and the bond between them strengthened. Kale and Roan, once wary and distant, found a rhythm in which their strengths complemented each other. Kale's careful, strategic mind balanced Roan's decisive authority, while Leora's courage and magic bridged the gap, reminding them both of what truly mattered. The village near the forest began to feel the change. The crops grew stronger, the streams clearer, and even the villagers, once fearful of the exiled Omega, began to speak of hope returning. Leora's presence became a symbol of courage, Kale's protection a symbol of resilience, and Roan's guidance a symbol of justice tempered with compassion. One evening, as the sun set and the forest was bathed in golden light, the three of them sat outside the tower. Leora rested her head on Kale's shoulder, her small hand holding his. Roan sat nearby, his eyes thoughtful, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. "You've both changed me," Leora said softly. "Kale, you taught me courage. Roan, you taught me patience. And together you both taught me love." Kale's hand brushed her hair gently. "You gave us that too, little one," he said. "You reminded us that even in darkness light exists." Roan smiled faintly, his eyes lingering on the child who had changed everything. Yes, he agreed. And you reminded us that home is not just a place, it is the people we choose to protect and love. The wind carried a gentle warmth through the trees, and for the first time in many years, all three of them felt peace. The curse, though not entirely gone, had been confronted. Their hearts, though still cautious, had been healed, and the bonds forged in fear, trust, and love were unbreakable. Kale looked at Leora and Roan. "We have a home now," he said quietly. "Not just this tower, but here, together." Leora smiled, her eyes bright. "And I have a family." Roan's gaze softened, a rare, unguarded smile crossing his face. "Then we will protect it," he said, "together always." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest, the trio stood united. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a promise. No matter the darkness that might come, the strength of trust, courage, and love would endure. And in that moment, the exile, the king, and the fearless child understood a truth older than any curse. Home is not just a place. It is where hearts meet and hope never dies. The forest, once alive with danger, seemed to hum softly, as if acknowledging their victory. And while the world beyond the trees was still uncertain, the three of them knew they would face it together. For Leora had spoken the words that changed everything. "You need a home, and I need a mommy." And together they had found it.